Hey there, are you struggling to open up to your husband who's in the midst of childhood trauma recovery? Are you avoiding having conversations that you know are important? I'm Danielle Sebastian, and in this video, I'm going to give you practical tips for how to overcome your fears of having those conversations so you can have a stronger and healthier relationship. However, before we get to those practical tips, I do want to discuss with you why it is so difficult for wives to have the conversations with their husbands that they know they need to have. And the first reason is because of a fear of triggering your husband in some way. Childhood trauma survivors, and especially those that are in trauma recovery, have a heightened sense of awareness, looking for danger in everything. And some things that are not necessarily things that would cause danger can sometimes trigger that response in their brains. And because of the closeness of a wife in this situation, you may find yourself triggering your husband without even knowing that you're doing it. So that fear is very real. The second reason that wives may have difficulty addressing difficult topics with their husband is because you feel guilty about adding things to someone's plate that is already struggling so much. This can be very difficult for a wife to try and have those difficult conversations when they know how much pain they're in and they feel like they're complaining when their husband has gone through something much more horrible. The third reason it can be difficult is that wives of childhood trauma survivors, especially in recovery, know what conflict is like. There's a lot of conflict in these relationships and situations because of the heightened sense of emotions. And wives may have difficulty having these conversations because they're afraid of having more conflict. These are just some of the reasons that wives may have difficulty having those conversations. So let's get to some really practical tips for overcoming some of those fears. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my story. My story started 8 years ago when my husband and I were struggling in a very unhappy relationship. We had a stepdaughter and a toddler son, and there were all kinds of behaviors that we just could not get past. And it was only after I was able to communicate that I had had enough, that I needed a break, we just couldn't make those breakthroughs that I was looking for, that my husband finally revealed for the first time to anyone his history of childhood abuse at the hands of the church. At first, I was relieved. I finally knew that there was something that was in the way of us being healthy and strong and being happy. However, I did learn the hard way in my relationship that by me not talking to my husband, by me not opening up, by me not being vulnerable, I was actually making things worse instead of better. So let's get to those practical tips about how you can overcome your fears. First and foremost, you have to identify the reason for your fear. It could be one of the three things that I talked about above, or there can be something else. But first and foremost, you do need to think about, okay, why am I having this fear? And how can I get past this in order to at least just start the conversation? Once you've identified the reason for your fear, I recommend that you bring that into the conversation. But before you have that conversation, I want to talk about tip number 2, and that is to wait for the right time and place. If your husband is really struggling, really down, really sad, withdrawing, or super emotional, this is not the time to have those tough conversations. My husband and I would make sometimes to go for walks, and that's when we had our best conversations. It just seemed as if we had something else to look at if we were moving our bodies, that we were able to have those conversations in a much more healthy atmosphere. My third tip is to plan out what you want to say. Plan on using those I statements that you hear all of these therapists and counselors tell you to use. Jot down your thoughts and feelings first and organize them in a way that makes sense. This can also help you stay on track during the conversations so that you don't get sidetracked. My fourth and final tip is to practice active listening. So once you have gotten all your thoughts out, it is time for you to listen. And by making eye contact and nodding and waiting for the right moment to jump in and give feedback, this can really help you get closer and have more conversations like this where the emotions are kept in check. I am absolutely 100% dedicated to stopping the silence of wives who are suffering alone with husbands in childhood trauma recovery. I want to create a movement and a community of wives who are going through similar situations so that we can help each other. I want you to check out my website. I have a free webinar on the top 4 secrets that I learned throughout this trauma recovery process with my husband that helped keep us together. My husband and I have been together for 12 years now, and I can truly say that we are happy and healthy, and I still use these techniques to this day to have those conversations. Thank you so much for listening.